Welcome to our channel. Today, we're exploring the fascinating and complex life of Dean Martin, an entertainer who charmed audiences worldwide as the King of Cool. But behind the smooth persona was a man with an inspiring journey filled with hard work, personal battles, and of course unforgettable moments in Hollywood history. From his humble beginnings as Dino Crescetti to becoming one of America's most beloved entertainers, join us as we dive deep into the untold story of Dean Martin. Dean Martin was truly one of a kind. Born Dino Paul Crescetti on June 7, 1917 in Ohio, he was the son of working-class Italian immigrants. Dean Martin's early life was deeply influenced by his Italian heritage and his family's values, which shaped his character and identity. Growing up in a predominantly Italian immigrant community in Ohio, Dean experienced the close-knit support and cultural richness of his heritage. However, he also faced challenges, as Italian-American families like his often encountered prejudice and discrimination. These early experiences with language barriers, cultural differences, and community solidarity contributed to his resilience and later shaped his adaptability and humor, characteristics that would become central to his public persona. Growing up as a shy, stammering boy, Dean faced bullying at school due to his broken English and Italian accent. This difficult start led him to drop out of school early, choosing instead to work alongside his father in a steel mill. However, that job didn't last long. Despite his quiet beginnings, Dean would go on to transform himself into an unforgettable figure in entertainment. His journey took him through boxing, comedy, singing, and acting, building him into the multi-talented legend he would become. Known as the King of Cool, Dean cultivated an image as a hard-partying, heavy-drinking playboy, a persona he maintained for years. However, behind the scenes he struggled with personal challenges, including a lifelong habit of heavy smoking. Eventually, this lifestyle took a toll. When doctors diagnosed him with lung cancer, his family was devastated, facing the beginning of a long and painful journey. Dean Martin's story reflects a life of highs and lows, filled with both charm and complexity, making his legacy one of Hollywood's most compelling. Dino soon figured out that the money was better on the wrong side of the law. During Prohibition, he started bootlegging liquor, bringing him into contact with some less than reputable people. Thanks to all those years defending himself from school bullies, he was no stranger to a fight, which led him to take up prize fighting under the alias Kid Crochet, an oddly gentle-sounding name for a boxer. Dean's time in the boxing ring wasn't merely a rough-and-tumble period. It also helped him develop a resilience and confidence that would serve him well in his entertainment career. Facing opponents as Kid Crochet, he became accustomed to intense pressure and learned to stay calm under fire, traits that later translated into his cool, relaxed stage presence. Boxing also gave him a sense of determination and stamina, which became essential as he pushed through the demanding schedules of Hollywood and live performances. Even after he left the ring, Dean carried with him a fighter's mentality, tackling his career challenges with a quiet, unshakable confidence. But fighting in the ring wasn't his only means to make quick cash. Dean struck out on his own and moved to New York City, where he shared an apartment with Sonny King, another young Italian-American with big dreams of making it in show business. For now, though, they were just two broke kids hustling for rent money. With limited education and few marketable skills, the two of them resorted to the obvious solution: running a secret fight club out of their apartment. They charged New Yorkers to watch them go head-to-head in bare-knuckle boxing matches, fighting until one of them was knocked out. Eventually, Dean decided he'd rather keep his teeth intact and accepted a job at an illicit speakeasy, the SLC Casino. There, he worked the roulette tables, dealt cards, and entertained guests. A far cry from his brawling days, but closer to the Dean Martin we remember. The smoky, dimly lit lounges of the speakeasy world introduced this tough, streetwise young Italian-American to a lifestyle he enjoyed. Dean discovered he had a knack for putting on a show, and he quickly realized that singing was a lot more fun and less painful than taking punches. He began singing wherever he could, whether in legal clubs or underground venues, imitating crooners like Perry Como, and the crowd loved it. Soon enough, he joined a popular local band which provided him with steady paychecks and began establishing his reputation. But there was one hitch. He was gaining attention under the wrong name. The world didn't know Dean Martin yet. They barely even knew Dino Crocetti. At first, he went by Dino Martini, but the lingering anti-Italian sentiment that had haunted his school days came back to haunt him in the industry. Unfortunately, the name was holding him back. Noticing this, bandleader Sammy Watkins suggested a change. He urged Dino to go by Dean Martin, a name that would soon become legendary. With that, Dean Martin was officially on his path to stardom, one that would ultimately cement him as a Hollywood icon, but also bring its share of heartache. At age 24, he married for the first time to Betty McDonald, who wed him as the rising lounge singer Dino Crocetti. The couple had 4 children together, but as Dino Crocetti transformed into Dean Martin, their marriage began to fray. By the mid-1940s, Dean Martin found himself performing in the same lineup as an energetic young comedian at New York's Glass Hat Club. That comedian was Jerry Lewis, and Dean immediately sensed something unique about him. Neither knew it then, but this meeting marked the beginning of both a legendary partnership and an eventual bitter feud. Deciding to join forces, they launched Martin and Lewis in Atlantic City in 1946, introducing one of the most iconic duos in showbiz history. Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis, though contrasting personalities, shared a mutual respect and fascination with each other's craft. Dean, with his smooth singing style and effortless charm, and Jerry, with his frenetic comedic energy, realized they had a unique chemistry that could elevate their individual talents. During their early days, they constantly adapted their act based on audience reactions, fine-tuning performances at each venue to maximize the blend of comedy and music. Their on-stage improvisation, initially born out of necessity, quickly became a hallmark of their performances, turning mishaps into comedy gold and endearing them to fans across the country. Yet the debut was an absolute disaster. Their carefully rehearsed act fell flat, and the audience was unresponsive. The club's owner threatened to fire them unless they came up with something better for their second show that same night. Desperate, Martin and Lewis retreated to a dark alley behind the club, scrambling for a plan. Instead of crafting a new act, they chose to wing it. Martin sang, Lewis improvised skits, and they ad-libbed banter throughout, throwing everything they could at the audience. What could have been a chaotic mess actually turned into an explosive hit. The crowd went wild, and the duo found their groove, turning what began as a Hail Mary into a wildly successful act that quickly spread across the eastern seaboard. Their momentum eventually carried them to New York's legendary Copacabana, a far cry from small-time clubs. Now they'd made it big, and soon there was only one place left to go. It was time for the entire world to discover Martin and Lewis. Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis made their television debut in 1948 on The Ed Sullivan Show, where their act was met with rapturous applause. The duo was ready to leave nightclubs behind and take their talents to television and film. However, as Martin's career began to soar, his marriage to Betty McDonald was falling apart. It seemed Betty preferred the struggling Dino Crocetti to the now famous Dean Martin, and in 1949 the couple divorced, with Martin securing full custody of their 4 children. Betty, perhaps unsuited for the spotlight, moved on quietly and lived the rest of her life in obscurity in San Francisco. Meanwhile, Dean's star continued to ascend, and he quickly filled the void left by his first marriage, marrying former Orange Bowl queen Jean Bieger just months after his divorce. Jean would become the love of his life, and the two shared nearly 25 years together, though their marriage would see its own ups and downs. Jean Bieger, his second wife and often described as the true love of his life, was a steady influence on Dean. She supported him through the heights of his career, standing by him as he transitioned from being one half of a comedic duo to a respected solo artist and a key member of the Rat Pack. Despite their deep bond, the challenges of Dean's work and personal struggles brought strain to their relationship. Jean reportedly dealt with many of his insecurities and frustrations behind the scenes, which added both complexity and strength to their marriage. Together, they created a family-oriented life offstage, balancing Dean's public persona with a quieter domestic life. For now, Martin threw himself into his career, entering an exciting new phase. In 1949, Dean managed to fit a whirlwind of life changes into 1 year. He divorced, remarried, and appeared in his first movie, marking a pivotal moment in his journey. Their first film, My Friend Irma, brought Dean and Jerry a shared payday of $75,000, a decent sum, but nothing compared to what lay ahead. Their agent soon secured them one of Hollywood's most impressive deals, granting them the freedom to produce one film a year with complete creative control. They also had final say over all nightclub, radio, TV, and record appearances, an arrangement that would ultimately earn them millions. The duo was on track to conquer Hollywood. However, this success began to reveal underlying tensions. While their on-stage chemistry was undeniable, things weren't so smooth behind the scenes. Jerry Lewis had secured the role of the comic, leaving Dean as the perpetual straight man, a dynamic that Martin found increasingly frustrating. He wanted to diversify their act and bring more balance, but Lewis resisted. As Jerry continued to dominate the comedic spotlight, Dean's resentment grew, making their partnership feel strained and uncomfortable. Dean Martin was nobody's second fiddle, but that's how people increasingly saw him. While critics showered Jerry Lewis with praise, calling him the true talent, Martin often found himself sidelined. Lewis basked in the admiration, seemingly indifferent to the situation. The tension reached a breaking point in 1954 while promoting their latest film, Living It Up. Although Martin typically stayed calm, even he could feel jealous, and the critics' comments only fueled his frustration. After a promotional photo shoot for Look magazine, Martin's patience snapped. The two posed together for the shoot, but when Martin saw the final cover, he was stunned. They had completely cropped him out, leaving only Lewis front and center. At that moment, Martin knew he was ready to move on. However, they still had one more movie to complete, Hollywood or Bust, and the production became painfully tense. On screen, their dynamic was as playful as ever, but behind the scenes, the atmosphere was icy, with Martin and Lewis refusing to speak when the cameras weren't rolling. Was Martin overreacting, or was Lewis behaving like a diva? Years later, Lewis would finally reveal the truth in his memoirs. Lewis ultimately admitted that he was to blame. By the 1950s, he had become one of Hollywood's biggest stars, and all that fame quickly went to his head. He began treating those around him poorly, Martin included. On screen, Hollywood or Bust might not have been particularly impressive, but behind the scenes it was pure misery. Martin's growing indifference led to constant arguments with Lewis until, at last, Martin reached his breaking point. Looking his old partner straight in the eye, he said, "To me, you're nothing but a dollar sign." That marked the end for them, and in 1956, exactly 10 years after they had first teamed up, they parted ways for good. Lewis likely believed that Martin would flounder without him, never suspecting what was coming next. Yet, unlike Lewis, Martin had formed strong friendships within the industry, one of them with another popular lounge singer he'd met in the 1940s while still trying to make a name for himself. As Martin's solo career began to take off, this connection would prove invaluable. Dean Martin and Frank Sinatra became close friends in the late 50s and early 60s, joining forces to form the Rat Pack, a name inspired by an earlier social circle of Hollywood stars, the Holmby Hills Rat Pack, who gathered at Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall's home. Together, Dean Martin and Frank Sinatra helped shape the cultural identity of the 1960s through their Rat Pack performances in Las Vegas. Known for their effortless charisma, the group blended glamour with an edgy humor that captivated audiences, embodying the spirit of the era. As Dean and his fellow Rat Pack members, Sammy Davis Jr., Peter Lawford, and Joey Bishop, took to the stage, their shows became legendary for their witty exchanges and sophisticated showmanship. Beyond entertainment, the Rat Pack also had a social impact by taking a stand against racial segregation, refusing to perform in venues that practiced discriminatory policies. This decision not only reinforced the group's commitment to equality, but also showcased Martin's values, adding another layer to his enduring legacy as an entertainer and advocate. At the heart of this new Rat Pack were Martin and Sinatra, joined by the talented Sammy Davis Jr., Peter Lawford, and Joey Bishop, among others. Their charm, effortless style, and quick-witted banter quickly made them legends, and they knew just where to take their act: Las Vegas. The Rat Pack in Las Vegas were a match made in heaven. On any given night, fans could catch one, two, or sometimes all of them performing at one of the city's glamorous casinos. The Rat Pack reached its peak in the 1960s during a time of cultural change in America. Despite their polished public image, they pushed boundaries with jokes that poked fun at taboo topics like Martin's drinking and Sinatra's womanizing. They also took a stand politically, actively supporting the civil rights movement by refusing to perform at clubs that excluded African American or Jewish entertainers. Having built his career first alongside Jerry Lewis and then as a Rat Pack icon, Dean was ready to go solo. This new phase began with The Dean Martin Show, which would go on to run for an impressive 264 episodes. By 1965, Martin was improvising every show, often leading him down scandalous paths. His off-the-cuff use of Italian curse words delighted most American viewers, but NBC faced a flood of complaints from Italian speakers. The network tried to rein him in, but Martin wasn't the type to be controlled. Despite these controversies, his popularity allowed him to keep doing things his way, and he intended to do even less. During contract renegotiations, he arranged for a clause allowing him to skip rehearsals entirely. He was improvising each show anyway. This deal freed up his entire week for golf, leaving him only to show up for tapings. By then, Martin had built an infamous reputation as a drinker, and his antics only fueled the rumors. With a glass of scotch seemingly glued to his hand during performances and a vanity license plate reading drunkie, he became America's most beloved drunk. Everyone knew he was the Rat Pack's resident boozing troublemaker. But that wasn't quite the whole story. In reality, the drink Dean held on stage was usually apple juice, and he was often the first to leave parties, preferring to spend time at home with his family. The whole lovable drunk persona was just an act, but he played it so convincingly that tabloids soon began speculating about his not-so-secret addiction. While Dean had left behind his early life as a bootlegger and bare-knuckle boxer when he turned to singing, the shadows of that past followed him. His friend Frank Sinatra had mob ties across the country, and the Rat Pack often performed for mobsters. One of their most notorious connections was Meyer Lansky, whose beautiful daughter, Sandra, would soon add a new layer to Dean's story. Years later, Sandra Lansky revealed a bombshell in her memoirs. She and Dean Martin had a passionate affair. According to Lansky, this romance occurred while Martin's wife was pregnant with their daughter Gina, and she claimed they had an unspoken agreement never to discuss their families when together. The affair was a shocking revelation, especially for a man known for his clean image. For decades, it seemed like Dean Martin was on an unstoppable rise, but in 1972, his world began to shift. After more than 20 years together, he filed for divorce from his second wife, Jean. Only a week later, the Riviera in Las Vegas canceled his contract, finding him too demanding. At 55, Dean was deep in a midlife crisis, and like many in that position, he made impulsive choices. Proving to be a man who couldn't stay single for long, he married again less than a month after ending his 24-year marriage. Martin married Catherine Hahn, a receptionist at a Beverly Hills hair salon, when he was 55, and she was just 26, a classic tale of the older Hollywood star and the young bride. But as it turned out, they didn't live happily ever after. The marriage ended in divorce less than 3 years later. While Martin seemed to be struggling in his romantic life, an important relationship from his past was about to be rekindled. After 2 decades without contact, Martin had not spoken to Jerry Lewis, So Frank Sinatra devised a clever plan to change that. During a Muscular Dystrophy Association telethon, Sinatra surprised Lewis by bringing Martin out on stage. "I have a friend who loves what you do every year and wanted to come out," Sinatra announced, building suspense. "Would you send my friend out, please? Where is he?" The crowd erupted as Martin joined Lewis on stage, creating an unforgettable reunion. Though Martin and Lewis would never be as close as they once were, they kept a warm, respectful friendship for the rest of Martin's life. Behind his onstage persona, Dean Martin was, at his core, a devoted family man. He loved and supported his 8 children, always prioritizing his family despite his reputation as a carefree entertainer. Dean named his first son with his second wife after himself, and young Dean Paul Martin quickly became the apple of his father's eye. Like his dad, Dean Paul sang and acted, but he also pursued passions beyond entertainment, playing professional tennis and even becoming a fighter pilot. Dino's successes and bright spirit brought immense joy to his father's life, which made the tragic end all the more heartbreaking. On March 21, 1986, 35-year-old Dean Paul Martin was part of a routine training mission over the California desert. During the exercise, his plane vanished from radar over a particularly foggy mountain range, sparking immediate concern. The son of one of America's most beloved entertainers was missing, and an intensive search effort was launched. For days, helicopters and planes scoured the mountainous terrain, but there was no trace of Dino's aircraft. Even President Ronald Reagan, a longtime friend of Dean Martin, dispatched the country's most advanced spy plane to aid in the search. Meanwhile, Dean held on to hope, praying from home for the news that his son had been found alive. Martin was desperate to find his son and went to extraordinary lengths, even hiring 2 psychics to assist in the search. One of these psychics directed them to San Gorgonio Mountain, where 3 days after the plane had disappeared, the search team found what they dreaded. Dean Paul Martin's aircraft lay wrecked on the mountainside with no survivors. Those closest to Martin noticed a profound change in him after his son's death. He was heartbroken, defeated, and deeply withdrawn. Frank Sinatra, determined to lift Martin's spirits, convinced him to join a massive stadium tour, hoping that the excitement of performing would ease his grief. But instead of cheering him up, the experience only deepened Martin's sorrow. While Sinatra thrived in front of the large stadium crowds, Martin felt lost and disconnected, yearning instead for the intimate, familiar atmosphere of nightclubs. Where Sinatra was ready to party all night as in the old days, Martin found himself adrift in a sea of unfamiliar faces, unable to shake his grief. By the 1960s, Dean Martin was growing older, worn out, and battling depression. Although he joined Frank Sinatra on a reunion tour, he was already at his breaking point when it began. After a show in New York City, Frank was ready to celebrate as they had in the old days, but Dean wasn't interested. That same night, he boarded his private jet back to Los Angeles, leaving his friends to finish the tour without him. After the tragic loss of his son, Dean largely stepped back from his career, choosing instead to spend as much time as possible with his family. Sadly, he didn't have many years left. While his onstage glass was often filled with apple juice, his cigarettes were real. In September 1993, doctors at Cedars-Sinai diagnosed him with lung cancer and urged him to undergo surgery immediately to extend his life. To his family's distress, Dean refused, choosing to accept his fate. He withdrew from public appearances in early 1995, spending his last year in the company of family and close friends. During his final years, Dean Martin was often seen as reflective and contemplative about his life and career. Close friends recalled his softened demeanor, a shift from his younger, bold personality to a more introspective man who cherished his memories with family and old friends from Hollywood. Members of his family mentioned that he would occasionally share stories of his early days with the Rat Pack in the golden era of Hollywood. His children often visited, and in moments of quiet, he expressed gratitude for the love and support he had received throughout his life. Many of his closest friends and collaborators remember Dean's impact and legacy with warmth, describing him as a true entertainer whose charm and resilience left a lasting mark on the entertainment industry. On Christmas Day in 1995, he passed away from acute respiratory failure at his home in Beverly Hills at the age of 78. Dean's death marked a somber day for Las Vegas, a city he had graced for so many years. In tribute, the casinos along the Las Vegas Strip dimmed their lights, honoring the King of Cool with a farewell as bright and memorable as his life had been. Dean Martin's legacy is one that continues to inspire and captivate even decades after his passing. From his enduring friendships and iconic performances to his personal struggles and triumphs, his story is a testament to resilience, talent, and the power of reinvention. If you enjoyed this look back at the life of Dean Martin, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more incredible stories from Hollywood's golden age. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.